From KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. On air and online, this is Intersection.
Hello and welcome to Intersection, where people and ideas meet, online and on KBIA. I'm Ryan Famulaner. Over the last week, an alleged rape case in Maryville, Missouri has attracted national attention and fostered many public discussions about the way the public and the judicial system handles the aftermath of such allegations. In Maryville, charges against two high school boys had been dropped, but after the uproar prompted by articles by KCUR and the Kansas City Star, a special prosecutor will be appointed to handle the case. But some in the Maryville community have also been a focus of the discussion, as the then 14-year-old victim and her family say they eventually moved away from the community because of bullying and threats after the alleged rape occurred in January 2012. Today on Intersection, rather than focus on the details of that specific incident, we plan to discuss the issues cases like these bring up. What are the challenges in cases like these for the survivors and the justice system? And what is behind the victim blaming that occurs in some of these situations? Joining us in studio today, Zach Wilson is the Development Director at the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. His organization does research and provides education and assistance to individuals and organizations fighting domestic and sexual violence. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Sure. Mary Beck is the director of the MU Domestic Violence Clinic. She's also a clinical professor of law at the University of Missouri. Mary, thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Sure. And joining us by Skype is Samantha Sunny. She's a former reporter at the Columbia Missourian, and she recently published a story about how the university and local law enforcement handle sexual assault cases, specifically among the college student population. We'll be talking a lot about that situation and what she found today on the show. Samantha, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sure. And for you and our audience, what do you want to talk about in the wake of this high-profile Missouri case? Share your thoughts by giving us a call at 573-882-8925 or emailing intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. This is a live show, so as always, we're not sure exactly what will be said, but considering the specific topic on this week's show, we recommend you decide whether or not the content is appropriate for you, especially if you have children with you. So to start off, Sammy, maybe it'd be great to start with you and a little bit about your reporting. What were some of the key findings in your story that came out about a month ago now?
Well, so I was focusing on the student conduct process at the University of Missouri. My original goal was to find out what sanctions or punishments the university was handing out for sexual assaults or sex offenses in general. And I quickly realized that the university was not going to tell me what sanctions they were handing out for which offenses. It is public record if a university student is found responsible for an offense like this. The sanction that they're given and the violation they committed is public record, but the university declined to give me that information. But what I did find out was that only 2 reports even made it to the student conduct office in the year I was looking at, which was 2012. And 2 is an extraordinarily low number. I mean, we all know that there were actually probably thousands of incidents. And when I say incidents, I mean any sort of sex offense. So not necessarily sexual assaults, but any non-consensual sexual behavior. So the story turned into more about how only 2 victims actually reported to the Office of Student Conduct and all of the various reasons that could have kept them from reporting.
Right. And Sammy, or I'm sure anyone at this table could talk about what are some of those reasons? Why are people not reporting? What are some of the obstacles there?
I think a primary obstacle, and we'll see that across the board even in nationwide statistics. If you look at it, 54% of rapes go unreported. So you're seeing things on college campuses that you also see reflected in our larger society. And a lot of that is back towards the victim blaming portion of it. I mean, historically, that's been the problem that we've had with sexual assault prevention. We've always kind of laid that on the forefront of the victim's responsibility. Don't be in certain places, don't go certain ways, instead of really switching that over towards what allows perpetrators to do these kinds of behaviors. And so whenever we're looking at risk reduction as the way for prevention, if a sexual assault occurs, then there must have been a breakdown in one of those risk protective factors, and that then is the victim's fault, instead of really looking at where the blame lies on the perpetrator.
And Sammy, what else did you find in your reporting?
Yeah, I think in my mind, the many different reasons for victims to not report are separated into emotional reasons, legal reasons, social reasons, and some of those are unique to college campuses, not necessarily unique to the University of Missouri. In fact, they're replicated on all sorts of universities and colleges and other institutions and places. But there are a lot of emotional reasons, like, for instance, that the victim probably knows the suspect or the perpetrator. There are also a lot of legal reasons, like legal technicalities and, for example, the definition of rape and things like that. So there are a lot. And actually, one of the things I struggled with in writing my story was how to sort of summarize all of these different reasons, because they can vary so widely and victims' reactions can vary so widely.
Yeah, and I guess here at the table, how does that environment here in a college campus, I guess, highlight some of these things? As Sammy said, they're not necessarily specific campus problems, right? But they're, you're so close to someone, you likely know the person. That's pretty common for any sexual assault victim.
Yes, and the involvement of alcohol in sexual assault is such that the report made by a victim, if she has been or he has been using alcohol, then the blame somehow seems to shift to the victim rather than, as you said, staying with the perpetrator. And then the emotional reasons that Sammy talked about are huge because there's a lot of implications for a victim. There's a culture of harassment that accompanies making such an allegation. So all of the perpetrator's friends or teammates or whatever may undertake to harass the victim. That's what happened in Maryville. That poor girl and her family ultimately moved out of town. So there's a number of factors there. There's a perpetrator with a sense of entitlement. There's a victim. There's a community of people in town or teammates or fraternity who will undertake to harass the victim. There's alcohol. And then there's typically adults who are willing to cover up. And you put all those together and it's a perfect storm, and it is almost insurmountable for victims, which is reflected in the incredibly low reporting here at the university. I mean, if 1 out of 4 college girls is sexually assaulted, and what do we have, 35,000 students? We had 2 reports. That's just absurd. And it's not because the university doesn't have procedures in place to try to address the violence. It's just bigger than what the university can handle in response to violence. I think the only answer here is prevention or greater attempts at prevention.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Zach?
I mean, especially, I think that Samantha and Mary both definitely hit it right on the head when they talk about the multiple barriers that are there, from legal technicalities towards the cultural pressures of people harassing. Even just, talking about healthy sexuality is a taboo topic in our culture.
Good point.
So if you're going to talk about abnormal sexuality, that it even comes torture. So there's shame that's involved with it and all those different things. And it goes back to exactly what you're talking about. It goes back to prevention. And for that really to occur, it has to be shifting social norms. It really has to be, because if we had a culture, especially if you look at a smaller insular culture like a campus, that did not accept anything on the continuum of sexual assault, from harassment all the way to rape, I mean, everything that was there, then all those other barriers that would be easier to overcome. I mean, we're not going to remove all the legal technicalities out there. We're not going to remove different things that are there. We can lessen those, but really with the support, that's really when victims can move forward and do the things that they need to do, knowing that they have the support of the peers that are around them, the institutions that are there, and also the legal system. I mean, that is a major component. We really have to look at how that's done. That's why we're really happy that we were able to get major revisions to Missouri sexual assault laws. We had some excellent support in the House and the Senate. Representative Jay Barnes was a great ally for us in getting those changed and really looking at the specific alcohol-related factors that you were talking about. It used to be that incapacity or incapability to provide consent wasn't looked at when it came to our rape laws. That's in there now. So it used to be the perpetrator had to drug someone basically, and it wasn't that you were out yourself having a good time and got too inebriated to actually provide consent. That removed that from our rape laws and really was in lesser charges, but that's changed. So we're getting some systematic changes, but the cultural changes, not only people not accepting this, but also bystanders getting involved. That's where prevention really is. Changing those social norms and bystanders intervening on what needs to be done.
I want to take a moment to remind our audience this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're discussing the challenges in sexual assault cases for the survivors and for the justice system. Joining us in studio are Zach Wilson with the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and Mary Beck, the director of the MU Domestic Violence Clinic and a clinical professor of law. And joining us by Skype is Samantha Sunny. She's a former reporter at the Columbia Missourian, and she recently published a story about how the university and local law enforcement handle sexual assault cases, specifically among the college student population. And for you in our audience, what are your reactions to what Samantha found in her reporting? We'd like to hear what you think. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. We'd like to remind you that you can watch Intersection as streaming video online during our live conversations every Monday afternoon at 2 at kbia.org. You can watch that video and join our online chat by going to kbia.org and scrolling down to the link for Intersection. Again, that's Mondays at 2 online at kbia.org. And Zach, one more time, I want to go back to you mentioned that legal code change. So did that just go into effect? So have we seen,
Yes.
So really that will mean a shift in the way that some of these cases are prosecuted.
Ideally,
right?
yes, it'll definitely provides that capability there. But as we've seen in Maryville, there is a lot of discretion with what prosecutors do and do not charge. So it really does go back to what is accepted, what voters push for in their communities, really everyone getting involved and supporting that rape and sexual assault does not occur in our community. But now those mechanisms are in place, and that's really good. And there's a lot of changes that were in there to make it much clearer. It did get a little confusing. There's, legislation gets built piece by piece. Sometimes you need to go in and kind of get an overhaul and get things all straightened up and where they need to be. And luckily we had the support this year in both the House and the Senate. So it was fantastic. It was great work that MCA-DSV did this year with the collective support of all of our member programs.
And Samantha, real quick, I wanted to help me clarify something on, we were talking about the fact that 2 of the assaults last year resulted in punishment for students. But can you help clarify some of those numbers too? I know a lot of your reporting had to do with figuring out those numbers. Can you help us understand what that means and what all the other numbers were as far as reports that may have been from campus, I guess?
Yeah, so people tend to assume that those 2 reports concerned sexual assaults. And considering that the students were suspended and expelled for them, they very well might have been sexual assaults. But in fact, the university declined to tell me what the violations were. So it might have been anything from a sexual harassment charge to indecent exposure to anything like that. And it's a very, very inordinate long time to get that information from the university. There are agencies like the RSVP Center, which is a resource on campus, sex offense survivors, and the police agencies were a bit more their data. But part of it was because the record keeping was problematic at the MU Office of Student Conduct, and they were also very resistant to talking to me about this story, like to give me information and to discuss it. I think it's a very taboo topic, like we've said, and everyone's trying very hard to put their best foot forward and do the best job they can, but then that also, I think, ends up in people being recalcitrant and withholding information that they really shouldn't.
Well, I think some of your reporting too had to do with the communication between the university and other legal entities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one thing that surprised me was the lack of communication, I'll say, between places like the RSVP Center, MU Police, the Columbia Police Department, the Office of Student Conduct, Office of Residential Life, places like that. I guess I always imagined that if, for example, the media, if the Columbia Missourian reported a rape on campus, then the Office of Student Conduct would do something about it, but they don't actually investigate cases unless someone comes and submits a report to them. So last year, only 2 victims actually came forward to them and submitted reports. The police don't necessarily feel any obligation to notify student conduct that an incident has occurred, although student conduct can ask police about that. There was also a law that surprised me, which is a good example of legal technicalities, where Missouri's public records law actually states that the names of sex victims are not public. So you can get a police report for a sex offense, but you can't get the name of the victim, which is a well-meaning law, certainly. But it also results in the police not being able to tell student conduct who a victim was in a certain incident. And if student conduct doesn't know who the victim is, then they have absolutely no way of investigating, or even if knowing if the victim is a student, because the victim has to be a student for the case to even fall within their jurisdiction. So I'm not saying that the agencies weren't speaking at all, but they certainly were not speaking to each other very much. And there were actually legal barriers to them speaking to each other about sexual cases in particular.
Mm-hmm. And Mary and Zach, I mean, in a situation where it's already difficult to get accurate reports from victims, how much more difficult are there these laws that kind of, I mean, there's this law and others that may, have other intentions and have important meanings, but also, make that process harder, I guess.
Well, the object is to protect the privacy of the victim and also to put her or him in control of the process. And many times the victims do not want an investigation by student conduct or by the police on campus or in town. So the victim is really in charge of that.
Mm-hmm. And so how does that conversation usually go? I mean, again, there's so many factors involved in that, right? But, how much of it is making sure they're in control, but also saying, something needs to happen here. You know what I mean? It's tough, right?
The university has procedures to make sure that victims are notified of their options, but there's never certainly any pressure placed on them to take advantage of those options. And we've already discussed all the reasons why victims don't like to report. They don't want their victimization to be made public, to be open to ridicule, to be open to blame, to get harassed. There's just a lot of factors working against the disclosure by the victim.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. There's also ways, though, that we can work around some of these issues while protecting confidentiality. And that's really where the development of sexual response teams, really looking at sexual assault response teams and really looking at coordinated efforts that the community can get around. And those are times where a lot of trends and a lot of cases, without going into specifics, those entities can work with each other. So maybe we don't have the specific hard data, but we understand the overall scope. And then whenever the nonprofit sector and whenever the campus sector and the police sector and those groups are coming together and having those coordinated meetings where they're really working together, good things can come out of that, as well as an understanding that everyone will handle this situation correctly. That will then move out in almost a ripple effect into the population, and where then people know that there's these institutions that care. And so it makes it more likely, yes, I will report this. Yes, I will take that next step, because they know that they'll be protected throughout the whole way. Unfortunately, a lot of that work is stuff that isn't on anyone's calendar right now. I mean, people are there to do it. Nonprofits are really trying to push it. Our member programs, RSVP is one of our member programs of the coalition. They're really trying to push those kinds of efforts moving forward. Unfortunately, the funding isn't there to support nonprofits in that work. We don't have any state dollars to respond to sexual assaults in our communities. We don't have this kind of coordinated community efforts that can support that. So that's really where then nonprofits and these groups rely on community support to get involved, to move forward. And then anyone that wants to learn how they can get involved to kind of support these efforts are free to contact our organization, MCADSV. You can go to our website, you can do those different kinds of things and figure out how to get involved.
I want to take a moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're discussing the challenges in sexual assault cases for the survivors and for the justice system. Joining us in studio are Zach Wilson with the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and Mary Beck, the director of the MU Domestic Violence Clinic and a clinical professor of law. And joining us by Skype is Samantha Sunny. She's a former reporter at the Columbia Missourian, and she recently published a story about how the university and local law enforcement handle sexual assault cases, specifically among the college student population. We'd also like to hear from you in our audience. Do you know someone who has been affected by sexual assault or domestic violence? What services or support systems did they need during that time? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. And Mary, maybe you can help us with this too. So again, it's a very big decision, and many times for victims it's going to be difficult to know what the right route is. But how important is the timing in putting together a successful case? I guess the speed of putting a case, of making that decision. I guess it's got to be a tough thing from a prosecutorial standpoint.
If you're talking about prosecution, then timing is critical. For one thing, if a victim delays reporting the rape, somehow that seems to suggest that it's not credible. If the victim was drinking, that suggests that it wasn't critical. And so a lot of victims will wake up, literally wake up, realize that they've been a victim of sexual assault, hop in the shower, be very sad, worrisome, call friends, and all of that results in a delay. It also results in destroying the evidence, because if, for example, a man or woman's been raped, there are rape tests that can be done that would identify the perpetrator. Keep in mind that many victims don't know who actually raped them, but the rape kits would identify the rapist through DNA testing. But if a victim showers, bathes, delays, gets sober, checks with his or her friends, all of that works to destroy the prosecutor's evidence and ability to go forward with the prosecution.
Right. And again, many times it's not going to be a quick decision, right? To not just on the gathering of evidence, but like you said, delays are a problem too.
That's right.
I guess.
And you can imagine how traumatic it would be to be raped. And then, here I am saying, we got to hurry up and get this reported. It's a very traumatic thing to have happen, and speeding around to get it reported is not the first thing that comes to a victim's mind.
And I was saying, and that's one of the reasons why I think the work that the rape crisis centers in communities, often it's also the domestic violence shelters, because they may be the only ones there that can respond depending on the community that you're in, where they can really play that critical role, where a rape crisis advocate can really get there and talk to an individual. A lot of the times that happens at a hospital, and so when victims have already made that decision to get to the hospital, but they can help them walk through what their options are. And I just wanted to make sure that if anyone's out there right now who is a survivor, whether it happened a day ago or whether it happened 2 years ago, there's services that are available for you. You can visit our website at www.mocadsv.org, and we have a breakdown of any community, any kind of services you want, so you can see a service provider. Also, you can give our organization a call, and we can help walk you through that process as well, too. And we can be reached at 573-634-4161. So that's really ways that people can get involved. Or if you just want to educate yourself and what you can do, those are also contacts that you can use. And then we can help connect you to a local program where you can go down there and volunteer. Or you can become a member of MCADSV so that you can then have your voice heard on the state level and different ways that you can do. So if you don't think this is something that's affecting you right now, the numbers bear out that it's going to affect someone in your life, maybe you. I mean, it's there. So learning and educating about it is the first step towards really changing some of our behaviors that are around that. So I really tell people, reach out, see what's going on in your community, see what's going on in the state.
That's where I think the university needs to move to. Was it a couple of years ago that every staff and faculty member at the university had to complete online sexual harassment training?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the university wants to protect its faculty and staff, or they wouldn't have done that. And I think the time is now to start mandating completion of an online domestic and sexual assault training and alcohol training for all students. It's cheap. It's online. It takes the student 35 minutes, and it's the difference of a lifetime if they learn to protect themselves or to recognize what constitutes domestic or sexual assault. Huge difference.
And what do they learn in those trainings for someone who hasn't ever had that training?
Well, like, amazingly, a lot of men really don't understand that if a woman is unconscious, she can't give consent. Now, I know you two think that's obvious, but I've had young men in my office who say, well, she didn't resist. Was she conscious? Well, no, she was passed out, but she didn't say no. I would never rape anyone. If they're unconscious, they can't consent. A lot of men don't know that. And girls, a lot of girls don't know. Do not take a drink once you have put it down. If you have put your drink down and walked away from it, don't ever pick it up again. Go get a fresh drink. I don't care what it costs. Your mom, your dad, your brother, or your sister will pay you for a fresh drink. Don't ever pick it up. Don't go somewhere without friends. And usually rapes occur in the first week or two of classes. And so if the university were committed to requiring the completion of online training for every man and woman who enrolls at the university, I think it would make far more difference than all of these post-assault efforts that we're making so earnestly to try to help.
Is college level early enough?
No.
Did it happen earlier than that?
No, definitely not.
I agree with you 100% with what you're talking about. It really is. And those conversations, historically, it goes back to what I was talking about previously. Historically, those conversations have been had with women in our society. People do talk more often, moms talking to daughters about, don't walk home at night by yourself. Don't do this. Don't, if you have a drink. I mean, those kinds of messages have been historically getting out there. And that's one of those things that, why critical needs to occur, puts all the responsibility on the victim to make sure that you're staying safe. But unfortunately, we're not seeing the other side of it, of fathers talking to sons, or of mothers talking to sons, because people don't want to see their son as a perpetrator. That's my precious little boy. I'll tell you right now, I'm a father of 3 boys. I've got an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And they're the best little boys in the world. Sorry for anyone else that has kids out there. But I'm going to have that conversation with my sons and specifically saying, no, I'm not going to sit there and say, don't be a rapist. I may get that at some point. But I'm going to talk about what it is, what consent is, but also how to treat women, how to be respectful, how not to try to exhibit power over someone. Because really, when you're looking at rape,
That's right.
It's exerting power over someone. So if you start talking to your sons about that, that's getting in front of the issue. That doesn't get the campus off the hook either. I agree with you 100%. Mm-hmm. There needs to be comprehensive sexual assault prevention going on campuses. But it needs to happen earlier.
Needs to happen in high school.
I'll be able to talk about it a little bit later in our program, but we have a great program that Missouri is the first in the nation of piloting out in middle schools, a middle school sexual assault prevention program, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt it. We will have to take a short break, though. This is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. Today we're discussing the challenges in sexual assault cases for the survivors and the justice system. Joining us in studio are Zach Wilson, Mary Beck, and Samantha Sunny is joining us via Skype. I'm Ryan Famulner. We'll be right back after a short break.